Welcome to Fourth and Frames. I'm Chris Battistel with my co-host Drew Scott and Rhett Manuel. Week 7 is in the books. Week 8 is here, and we will be breaking down our Bussin, Disgussin, and mid players. We get our argument on in master debation, and we pick players that we either ringing the alarm on or canceling the alert for in Week 8. Let's get it popping. We are live, Fourth and Frames. Week 7 is down. Welcome to everybody watching on YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. I believe Facebook's having some issues today, so we'll catch you next week. If you are watching on Twitter, head over to the YouTube and drop a comment in the comment section. We will answer your questions live on air. Fellas, Drew, Rhett, how was your Week 7 going? Halfway through the season, are we on the up and up? Or are we on to 2024 as a Leaf fan? I know the feeling.
Man, we are feeling good. We're flying high for the most part. Bit of a losing streak in the Fantasy and Frames Dynasty League right now, but everywhere else, feeling pretty good about Scott Fish Bowl right now. 8-6, inching ever closer to the playoffs right now.
Yeah,
a couple Dynasty leagues. One where I've got fantastic. Got a 6-1. Got a 5-2 in the home league. Warrior Bowl hitting a little bit of a schneid right now, but started off 4-0, so playoff hopes are still there. Man, all is well. And as usual, the whole point of the game, having fun, baby.
No, we're not. I'm not having fun. Our man behind the screen, Gator J, he handed me an L in our Fantasy and Frames Dynasty League this week. I was going into Monday Night Football with a chance, and then Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson absolutely put me in my place. Everything else went well as far as leagues go, other than me having to watch Gator celebrate this win behind the screen right now. But in Scott Fish Bowl, I started Deshaun Watson and Jon Robinson, so my already terrible SFB season is just more and more downhill. We're just rolling downhill at all time speeds right now. So everything's fine.
But I just want to shout out Gator J right now for doing Goldberg stuff behind the scenes right now. Y'all can't see him, but my man is really about to drop the spear on Drew right now and follow it up with a jackhammer. It's fantastic stuff, man.
Oh yeah, I think all week he's been listening to that dun 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 dun. dun.
Arthur Smith tonight. Already jackhammered me. Like it's nothing new. It's just adding pain to it right now, man.
Well, on to week 8, right?
That's right.
Week 8. Week 8 is a new week for us to move forward to our ultimate goal, which is a fantasy football championship. Whether you play for money or the ultimate bragging rights, we here at Fantasy and Frames and Fourth and Frames are looking to get you plugged into the information you need to get ready week in and week out this fantasy football season. Head over to the website, www.fantasyandframes.com, for weekly articles, IDP start sits and waiver pickups, as well as redraft start sits and waiver pickups, weekly rankings from our guy Drew. Jorge's in there, Tyler's in there, Nate Markham's in there, delivering their rankings. We got podcasts right across every situation of fantasy football. Dynasty 365 providing dynasty content. Us here at Fourth and Frames giving you the redraft content you need every week. Shoot the gap for the IDP content with Nate, Jorge, and Hollywood Titan. And then week in and week out, we got the Fantasy and Frames waiver wire show every Tuesday, 7:30 p.m., answering all your waiver wire questions, getting you ready for the new week with Gator J and Zach, new member to the Fantasy and Frames team. Welcome to the family. And of course, the Fantasy and Frames mailbag show every Thursday at 7 p.m., answering all your questions, start sits, defense, IDP, trade questions, any question you got fantasy football related, getting you ready for the week as well. And finally, on Sundays, the ultimate grind with the Fantasy and Frames pregame show from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern, just answering every question across the board, getting fantasy football managers ready to win their week. With that, fellas, let's get into some of the injury news for week 8. There's some big ones on the board already. We don't know what's going on with Deshaun Watson in that whole situation. It looks like he's out for at least another week. Baker
Didn't they just say after the last game he was going to play this week?
Yeah, he was supposedly cleared, but then he wasn't cleared.
Oh, okay. Just checking. Sorry.
Yeah, he's got
shout out
there.
The Cleveland Browns. I just love the fact that they just took all this money fully guaranteed, and there's just it's just a beautiful fire that's going on right now. Yeah, it's not great. There was a joke somewhere in there that I decided was in poor taste, so we're just gonna walk away from that right now. But poor investment by the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, speaking of Cleveland Browns, Jerome Ford's looking like he might miss another week. So if you got Kareem Hunt off your waivers, that's a great pickup there. Brock Purdy has entered the concussion protocol, did not practice. A lot of the Wednesday did not practices, again, like we mentioned last week, are just probably rest days. Alvin Kamara, again, didn't practice today, but it was just due to illness. It's that Thursday, Friday practice that
of the Saints offense.
Yeah, exactly. It's that Thursday, Friday practice reports, Saturday practice reports that you really want to watch out for heading into your matchups. For the Thursday matchups, I believe Baker Mayfield and Chris Godwin were questionable. They were limited at practice. So you just want to, for the Thursday games, you want to watch the Tuesday, Wednesday practice reports. For the Sunday games, it's imperative that you keep an eye out for those Thursday, Friday practice reports. Fellas, are you ready to get into Bussin, Disgussin, and Myth?
Let's do it.
Go and try your luck. Test me in again. We let it rain. Please don't start us up. Got that black and white, that yin and yang. Mr. Officer, please don't search us. We don't.
Woo! New segments coming in hot, getting us ready. So Bussin, Disgussin, and Myth pretty much is Bussin. We're giving you a player that we think is going to break out for the week, a player for wide receiver wise that's outside the top 20, a top 15, a running back outside of the top 15, a tight end outside of the top 8, and a QB outside of the top 12. This week, we seem to be pretty high on a few wide receivers. Drew, who is your Bussin pick for week 8?
I'm hoping you're going to like this one because I think you just traded for this guy in a league a couple
weeks
ago.
So a league I lost Justin Jefferson. So picking him up and then him having such a bad game, man, it hurt. I lost that week. I lost.
Better days are ahead, and it starts right now. Wide receiver Calvin Ridley, he's at Pittsburgh this week. There's no doubt that outside of week 1, it's been mostly disappointing for those of us that invested that draft pick around the 3-4 turn on Calvin Ridley. I get that, but I do think this week's going to be a step in the right direction. One of my biggest complaints with Calvin Ridley doesn't really have anything to do with Ridley, but the way that the Jaguars have used him. Despite how skilled of a route runner he is, how versatile he is, he's only played 16% of his snaps in the slot, and less than 10% of his targets have come across the middle of the field, which is where it's a lot easier to eat than it is trying to live on the sidelines. He's constantly being asked to make big plays along the sideline, and that's pretty much about it. Now, the good news for us is that's actually a good thing whenever you play the Pittsburgh Steelers. On the year, the Steelers have given up the most fantasy points above expectation to the wide receiver position, and they're bleeding fantasy points right now, right where Calvin Ridley lines up at. So far, they've only given up 27% of their fantasy points to slot wide receivers, despite being the best matchup for fantasy wide receivers. So they've given up 73% of their fantasy points to receivers that line up out wide, which is the 8th most in the league. There's also one other great note I saw on Twitter. Graham Barfield, at Graham Barfield on Twitter. If you're not already following him, you should be. He dropped this note that Ridley leads in target share and air yard share over Christian Kirk against single high coverage looks, which is whenever there's a single high safety alone as the deep defender. The Steelers just so happen to play single high at the 7th highest rate and are giving up the 3rd most yards per game to outside receivers in this formation. So, look, I was someone that was highly invested in Ridley this offseason, and there's no doubt he hasn't been what I hoped he would be as a fantasy asset. I believe he's been a better real-life wide receiver for the Jaguars than he has been a fantasy wide receiver for us fantasy managers. But this week, I think he's going to be making Jaguars fans and fantasy managers happy this week. And so I've got him for week 8 ECR. They have him down at wide receiver 29. I've got him up at wide receiver 20, and I'm still not convinced that might be high enough. I think he's even the better option over his teammate Christian Kirk this week.
Yeah, man. And after that promising week 1, we were all like, all right, this is it. Calvin Ridley time, baby. He's going to take over as the Jacksonville Jaguars, a dominant wide receiver. So, and then he kind of fell off a little bit. It's been hit and miss. But like you said, he's a better Jacksonville Jaguar wide receiver than he is a fantasy wide receiver, because he is opening those holes up for Christian Kirk and the other boys in the passing game. Rougarou, evening, boys. Evening, Rougarou. Thanks for joining the show. Drew's pick, Calvin Ridley, Bussin player for week 8. Rhett, hit us with yours, big guy.
Well, we're ready to have some fun because we may finally be hitting the time of the season where the Kansas City Chiefs have an actual target outside of Travis Kelce. And we're going to go ahead. We're going to go in with Rashee Rice this week against the Denver Broncos. Wide receiver 38 on the Fantasy Pros ECR rankings. Doesn't tell the whole story because he is a guy that has been consistently getting better as the season has gone on. Has actually had 5+ targets in 5 of his 7 games this season. Has been a wide receiver 3 or better in 4 of those 7 games this season. So he's been pretty consistent. And just to boot, he's playing the most fantasy football friendly defense in the league, baby. Let's go. They're giving up 22.9 fantasy points to wide receivers this season. That's around middle of the pack, 16th in the league, but they haven't played Patrick Mahomes yet. They haven't had to deal with Travis Kelce. So this should be one of those weeks where we see Rashee finally step up and do what he's needed to do, because it's been bad for the Denver Broncos the past 4 weeks. Against wide receiver 1s over the past 4 weeks, they've given up 31 receptions on 36 targets and 5 touchdowns. So let's feast. Let's get ready. Let's go. Rashee Rice has actually been pretty good this year. Only has played 45% of snaps, but has had a 29.3% target rate when he's played those snaps, which is 9th best in the league.
Nice.
And on 34 targets, 8 of those targets have been in the red zone. So we're telling me that this guy is getting looked at in the red zone. He is not just a secondary thought. He is one of the guys that is being seen as a potential big-time red zone threat for the Chiefs. He's averaged 0.64 fantasy points per route run, which is 2nd in the NFL this season. And he's had a 58.2% route rate win for the season. So if he's lined up against somebody, he's probably getting open. So this might be that week that we've all been waiting on. We've been saying, man, Rashee Rice looks better and better and better every week. I think the breakout is coming this week. I think we're seeing somewhere, if I had to guess, 6 catches, 90 yards, a long touchdown somewhere in there. And if you get that out of Rashee Rice this week, you're not taking too much away from Travis Kelce, who's still going to get his. They should jump up big. They should have a big first half. Maybe you have a running back who maybe Pacheco gets a little more run in the second half to kind of protect those guys. But by and large, I think this is the week we're going to see big things out of Rashee Rice, that people are going to start to see the light on that guy, man.
Yeah, I dig it, man. As fantasy football guys in general, man, we really got to work on these abbreviations. Baseball's got some really cool ones, WAR and WHIP, and we're over here struggling trying to say route, run, rin, percentage. I mean, we really got to work on that stuff. Look, we got to get some cool abbreviations.
They even got one called XFIP, which sounds like so futuristic and awesome. I'm like, man,
Yeah,
We need
man.
good
This
ones.
is tough, man, because some of this stuff is how do you even abbreviate that? Rudera? Oh, he's got a 64% Rudera. You know, you can't do that. You gotta say the whole sentence. We just gotta be better with that. We gotta work on that stuff. We gotta get some cool ones in there. But so far, Bussin wide receivers for week 8. Drew went with Calvin Ridley. As you just heard, Rhett went with Rashee Rice. And for me, I'm going wide receiver of the Atlanta Falcons, Drake London. But fellas, I gotta say, I'm upset. Fantasy Pros ECR wide receiver 31 on Drake London's head is disrespect.
Woo!
The kid has been absolutely dominant the past 3 weeks, 9.3 targets per game. The next highest wide receiver on the Atlanta Falcons is Mac Hollins, averaging 2 targets per game through that span. The only wide receiver on the Falcons with an end zone target or a significant target share on 3rd or 4th down. Through those 3 weeks, he is the first read option 30% of the time, an uptick on his season average. The Atlanta Falcon offense, which has been top 12 in pass attempts over those past 3 weeks, has been funneling through Drake London, the tight ends, and the running backs. And this week, who do they get? The Tennessee Titans, a team that is great against the tight ends, 5th fewest points against per week. A team that is good against the running back, 14th fewest points allowed per week, but a team that is bad against the wide receiver. The Titans are allowing the 23rd most points to the position on average per week. The 6'4", 213-pound wide receiver is looking to draw a ton of Christian Fulton, a 5'11", sub 200-pound corner. 3 of the 6 games, the Tennessee Titans had a wide receiver go for 100 or more yards against. Josh Downs had 97, which he was oh so close, and Jamar Chase had 73. Falcons are on top of the division and are going to look to ascend towards an NFC South championship. Not easy to say as a Saints fan. Originally, I had his projection at 6 catches, 110 yards, and 1.5 touchdowns, but this one's for the dogs. 8 receptions, 130 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Let's go. Drake London is my busting player for week 8. Rouge Roo, hey, Chris, I got the London enthusiasm, but do you trust Ritter that much? I trust the Falcons' offense's ability to kind of release the reins a little bit on Drake London. As you can see, in the past 3 weeks, they are one of the top passing offenses in the NFL, and against a Tennessee team that is stymied against the run, pretty good against the tight end. I'm looking for Drake London to get his. The only thing that might worry me is the game script, because the Tennessee Titans are now looking to start Will Levis, friend of the show, 4th and frame. So that's the only thing that might go against Drake London.
Live, laugh, Levis, baby.
Live, laugh, Levis. We got a question in the chat. Randy Miller asks, Devonta Smith or Calvin Ridley rest the season full PPR, Drew?
Yeah, so I know I just talked up Calvin Ridley, but the answer for me is Devonta Smith. And I don't want to spoil too much, but Randy, stick around if you ain't got nothing going on, man. We're going to be talking about Devonta Smith in our Ring the Alarm segment here toward the end of the show, and I'll tell you why you should be excited for Devonta Smith for the rest of the year.
Do y'all get down with any IDP? We do play some IDP right after us.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah, you know me. Right after us, the Shoot the Gap show with Nate Markham, Jorge Edwards, and Hollywood Titan are on. They talk IDP, so they're all about that stuff. Make sure you get in there and ask any questions of them that you may have. Clearly, I am a who dat to the core, but the Falcons could get scary. They could. The defense is pretty good there in Atlanta. If that offense can get going with the pieces that they have, they can definitely get it rolling. So our busting players.
The thing about that team's their head coach.
He's bad tonight. Always bad.
Drew's down bad. Drew, you know what? You feel like you got something on your chest, man. You feel like you got something. I can see it. It's see it in your eyes, Drew. You know what? I'm gonna mute my mic. The frame is yours. Let him have it. Let the coach have it, brother.
And I'm so far away from being qualified as a head coach, but I'm so tired of Arthur Smith and his whole, I don't care about your fantasy team. I just care about winning games shit. Like, that's really weird energy coming from a head coach that's 18-23 so far as a head coach. Like, maybe you should start using your great players that you've invested top draft capital in if you care so much about winning games. And I hope for his sake that he's not the one making NFL draft decisions, because that would make his game plans even that much weirder to begin with. He drafted Kyle Pitts 4th overall. Now he brings in his boy John, who's freaking Smith, to split opportunities with Kyle Pitts. Drafted Drake London 8th overall, and thank God he finally decides he wants to use him. And then to top it off, he drafts a running back in the top 10, the one position you don't – one of the very few positions you don't invest a top draft pick in. He drafts a running back number 8 overall and has him split snaps with a former linebacker. And that's no disrespect to Tyler Algier. He's been a solid NFL running back, good enough to where I didn't think that there was any need to invest a top 10 draft pick in a running back whenever you had guys like, I don't know, Jalen Carter sitting there for you to draft instead if you weren't going to feature this running back you used the top 10 draft pick on. But since they went ahead and drafted a running back, let's talk about it. Bijan has over 100 more rushing yards than Algier, despite having 15 less rushing attempts. He's averaging almost 2 full yards per carry than Algier. His explosive run percentage is double what Algier's put up. He's forced twice as many missed tackles. He has a higher yards after contact per attempt. He's been the better running back across the board, which is what you would expect whenever you take a running back 8 overall to replace your day 3 running back, or at least I thought that he was going to replace your day 3 running back. And that's not even without talking about the whole headache stuff that went on this past week. And I don't blame Bijan for none of that. I'm sure he wasn't feeling like himself. And if he wasn't feeling like himself, I don't know. For one, I don't know why that wasn't communicated, at any point, because apparently Arthur Smith found out on Saturday, could have said something pregame Sunday. He has this competitive advantage that he was on to so that hopefully he can climb up to a 500 career winning percentage at some point. If he holds enough cards in, maybe he can get up there. But if that's the case and you hold him out pretty much all game, why are you waiting until the last drive of the game to give him a touch? Like, you've had no problem just giving Tyler Algier the ball all season. Why are you waiting until the last series of a game where Jon Robinson isn't himself to give him the ball? Like, just hold him out. He's not himself. He doesn't feel himself. If you want to protect him, then protect him. Why are you putting him in the game, or why are you giving him touches in the last drive? Like, it's so annoying, man, because Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Bijan, those are 3 guys that I've loved as prospects. And they somehow all 3 of them have ended up with the same dumbass head coach. And better days are ahead for these guys. They're so talented that even a coach as bad as Arthur Smith won't be able to hold them down forever. But this is like a 3-year buildup of just, first it was Kyle Pitts, then it was Drake London, now it's Jon Robinson. I'm so tired of this dude. And he talks about fantasy football more than we do. Every interview, he's quick to remind us how much he doesn't care about fantasy football. Then stop talking about it, man.
He was probably playing Bijan. He was playing Bijan this week. Definitely was playing Bijan. Mr. Scappers, Arthur Smith gives out cooked carrots to trick or treaters. Good evening, Mr. Scap. Thanks for tapping in. That was an all-time comment. Hang that one in the rafters. That's called Drew. That feel good to get that off your chest, brother. I feel better. I feel better. Good, man. Good, bro. I like it, man. You spoke the truth. Spoke the truth, man. You're as a fantasy player, you spoke the truth. As a football, coach or front office guy, who knows what the thinking is there, but as a fantasy football guy, it's frustrating, man. And you're right. Some of that front office stuff you said too is right. Like drafting the running back as a top 10 pick. Just brain fart after brain fart for Arthur Smith. And that was some hot stuff, man. I don't know where to go from here. It was so hot. It was good. It was good, Drew. I'm happy you got that off your chest.
Thank you.
I'm happy for you. You liked it.
Yeah. Arthur Blank, if you're listening, hey man, Drew's got some good insight for you right there. So let's get into discussing players of week 8. And discussing players are players that we don't think are going to hit their potential or their projection for the week. wide receivers inside the top 35, running backs inside the top 20, tight ends inside the top 12, and quarterbacks inside the top 20. So usually guys that we don't think are going to really play that good. So Drew, I mean, after that, do you want to take a breath and let Rhett go, or are you ready to dive into your discussing player? Bring a little bit more heat with that.
My discussing pick is Arthur Smith.
For previous notes.
Yeah. See previous email. No, my discussing player this week is Courtland Sutton, wide receiver for the Denver Broncos, going up against Kansas City. So I'll be the first to say that up to this point, I was wrong on Courtland Sutton during draft season. Shout out to our boy, part of the Fantasy and Frames family, Kyle Z. He put up the redraft target series video on Sutton this offseason telling you why you should draft him. I was not on board. I did not expect him to be the wide receiver 20 through 7 weeks. But I don't think his fantasy output is going to match up with his week 8 ECR, though. So far, his fantasy production has been very TD dependent. He scored touchdowns in 5 out of 7 weeks. In the 2 weeks he didn't score a touchdown, he was the wide receiver 47 and the wide receiver 82 those weeks. Now, the Kansas City Chiefs defense, they just so happen to have given up 8 receiving touchdowns so far on the year, which is the 3rd lowest total in the league. And the lowest total in the league is 6. So they're not far off from being, tied with the teams that have only given up 6 touchdowns on the year. So on top of only giving up 8 receiving TDs, they're giving up the 5th lowest fantasy points above expectations to the wide receiver position as well. If he doesn't find the end zone this week, I think it could really end up hurting your fantasy team. And with us finally getting a break with the bye weeks, I think that there's a pretty good possibility that you could find a way to sit him. Fantasy Pros, week 8 ECR has him at wide receiver 27, but I've got him down at wide receiver 36 for the week.
There it is. Discussing play of week 8. Rhett, hit us with the Heisman. Who's your discussing player week 8, brother?
Okay, I'm a big tight end guy, but I'm going to tell you guys to avoid Dalton Kincaid, despite the supposed opportunity against Tampa Bay this week. Heads into the week as the ECR tight end 11, which there's a whole bunch of tight end debate that's been going on within the Fantasy and Frames family. They'll probably get more into that on Sunday, but I'm going to tell you why Dalton Kincaid is not that guy this week. Supposedly heading into a bad matchup against the Tampa Bay Bucks, and it is true because they have been the best team in the league this season in terms of defending tight ends at the position. I'll give you a couple of examples as to why that is true. TJ Hawkinson, tight end 3 on the season, played Tampa Bay week 1, 8 receptions for 35 yards. Later in the season, they play Sam Laporta, also a top 5 tight end, correct? 11 targets, 4 receptions, 36 yards. Dallas Goedert, another top 6 tight end, 5 receptions, 41 yards. No receiving touchdowns given up against the Tampa Bay defensive tight ends all season. So that tells me right there that whatever they're doing to funnel to the outside is working. And yes, Kincaid is coming off of his best game of the season. 8 targets, 8 receptions, 75 yards. But do we want to give him his flowers for doing it against the New England Patriots is the question. I don't know. Tough ask, Bob. But anyway, Dalton Kincaid has mostly been average this year, and his projections on Fantasy Pros this week are 4 catches for 40 yards. That could very well be less with this defense that he's playing. I can't put faith in this matchup. I know Josh Allen is a dog. I know Stephon Diggs is going to get some attention. I know James Cook is having a nice season. But if Dalton Kincaid ends up with a 3 catches for 20 yards this week, I would not be surprised at all. And for a guy that's being ranked so highly and with better options out there, I know tight end is a wasteland outside of Kelsey and Andrews and Darren Waller. Excuse me, there was something in my throat there. But we can't do the Dalton Kincaid thing this week against Tampa. Maybe later on he has been developing. He's getting some rapport there, but for the most part, it's a stay away from me this week.
You know who you should start instead of Dalton Kincaid? Dallas Goedert.
Darren Waller.
You should start Dallas Goedert instead.
Travis Kelce.
That's right. We bring the hot takes on the show. Start Travis Kelce.
Travis Kelce will finish. I didn't want Dallas who? Jorge Edwards. All right. My disgusted pick of the week, running back Green Bay Packers. Aaron Jones popped up on the injury report already with that hamstring. So maybe it's a situation where the Green Bay Packers, with the performance of A.J. Dillon recently, feel comfortable letting Aaron Jones just continue to ease into game shape. Dillon has had a higher snap share, rush percentage, route percentage, although has received less targets when both have been on the field. That was the 3 games that they did play together. Aaron Jones did concede the snap share to A.J. Dillon in those games. So A.J. Dillon is on the field more, but if I asked you guys right now, even though I'm telling you A.J. Dillon's on the field more, he's rushing the ball more, he's running more routes, although receiving less targets. If Aaron Jones is healthy, knowing that A.J. Dillon's is part of the game plan more of at least being available on the field, who are you going to take as a fantasy asset? You're going to take Aaron Jones, right? You're going to take Aaron Jones. You're going to take Aaron Jones pretty much all the time there. This week, he's got the Minnesota Vikings, who he has a career average 10.8 fantasy points against. Minnesota has been pretty good versus the run, allowing the 13th fewest points against on a per week basis, 13.77 points for the running backs. Only really 2 running backs have had good days against the Minnesota Vikings. That's DeAndre Swift and Christian McCaffrey. And if you look at that and you say, okay, DeAndre Swift, Christian McCaffrey, Aaron Jones are 3 running backs that do what? Any guesses? Catch the ball. 3 running backs that catch the ball. And if you look at that, you would think that Aaron Jones would be set up to have a good game, but the Minnesota Vikings have been pretty good at shutting down pass catching running backs, allowing only 3 receptions and 20 yards against. That's 4th fewest per week. Christian McCaffrey had that 1 catch where he broke off. I think it was that 40-yard touchdown last week, which gave him that little bit more of a boost. So we take out that outlier catch. The Minnesota Vikings have been elite against pass-catching running backs. And if that's where Aaron Jones shines in the Green Bay Packers offense, this might be a situation where you sit Aaron Jones. Potential also for a negative game script facing the Minnesota Vikings with a potential for a shootout there. That could also maybe work in his favor, considering the amount of pass attempts that the Green Bay Packers might have to perform in order to stay in the game. But again, if you look at the numbers that Minnesota Vikings is pretty good against the pass catching running backs. Projection, 8 rushes, 30 rush yards, 5 receptions, only because of the potential of a big passing night, 40 yards. So nothing to write home about. Our discussing players on the week: Drew went with Courtland Sutton, Rett went with Dalton Kincaid, and I went with running back Aaron Jones. Just a reminder, anyone watching on Twitter, if you want to drop a question in the chat, we cannot interact with the Twitter comments, so hop over to YouTube or Twitch. We are on Twitch tonight as well. Drop a question in the chat, and we will get to those for you heading into week 8. We gave you our Bussin players: Calvin Ridley, Rashee Rice, and Drake London. We gave you our Disgussin players: Courtland Sutton, Dalton Kincaid, and Aaron Jones. Now we're going to give you our mid players heading into the week. Our favorite, pretty much, QB 2 to 3 play, wide receiver 3 to 4, RB 2 to 4, back end tight end 1 to tight end 3. Pretty much guys that we think are safe plays for the week, guys that we think are at the very least going to hit their floor. And Drew's got a good one at the top.
Yeah, so Gus Edwards, if you don't know, he's playing at Arizona. He's been one of the most underrated running backs in the league since he got drafted, and nothing has changed this year. He's right back in that same spot. I'm convinced the dude probably came out the womb averaging 5 yards a carry, and he's still not getting the respect that he deserves. Like, he's coming off an RB6 finish in week 7 against what had been a really tough Detroit Lions defense up to that point. Whenever it comes to the run, like, Detroit was shutting down every running back, and then Gus came out I popped off another 5 yards of carry, running back 6 on the week. Now he gets a much better matchup against the Arizona Cardinals, who have given up the 6th most fantasy points above expectation to the running back position. And on top of that, they've given up 8 rushing touchdowns on the season as well. So, I mean, for Gus, he's not going to give you – he's giving you next to nothing in the receiving game. It is what it is. Don't expect a bunch of receptions from him. He's not going to do that. But he's good for a solid 15 to 16 carries in a matchup against a soft run defense in a game that I expect Baltimore to be ahead. And I think is a really good anytime touchdown bet this weekend as well for all you degenerates out there. So Fantasy Pros Week 8 ECR has him as running back 25. I've got him up at running back 18. Fire up the Gus bus this week, no doubt.
There it is. Gus Edwards, Drew's favorite mid-play of Week 8. Rhett, you got another running back for us. A guy that maybe just came off the couch a couple weeks ago. Hit us with it, man. You're on mute.
If you had Daryl Henderson on your bingo card for being a guy that we would say would be a start at Week 8 of the season this year, then take me to the sports books right now and go ahead and give me your plays. You're probably also the guy who had the Rangers and the Diamondbacks in the World Series, but we're going to keep it moving. Daryl Henderson at Dallas this week, ECR running back 29, purely a volume play, guys. He's going to have volume against what is a good Dallas defense, but a Dallas defense that has been mostly good, but has given up a couple pretty good games this year. They gave up 18.6 points to James Conner. They gave up a 13-point game to Jordan Mason. But overall, they've been pretty good. And like I said, we're looking at a volume play. Fantasy Pros has a projection for Henderson at 13 carries for 53 yards. Looking at what I think he's going to do this week, I think that's pretty in line for what we can expect, because I know everybody sees Dallas as the, quote, better team. But I think something tells me that the Rams are going to be pesky this week and give them a pretty good game, which means we should have some pretty good Daryl Henderson volume. So I'm thinking 15 to 18 touches, probably struggles a little bit, gives up some Royce Freeman stuff, probably has about 15 yards. But if he snakes a TD or one big play, that's really all you need to outperform that projection that they have this week. And I like the chances of that because the Rams have, especially last week and all season, they've low-key been a pretty balanced team, and they've liked to give one guy a good bit of volume all season. So right now that seems to be Daryl Henderson. And so with that being said, play the volume, trust your gut, make him a flex play, because I don't think it's a bad one this week.
Mm-hmm. That quote, though, definitely not from Drew. Definitely not from Drew. He definitely don't think Dallas is better than the LA Rams.
No. If somebody thinks that if somebody thinks they're a quote better team, they can quote kiss my ass.
He is on fire tonight. Oh my God.
I like it. Hotel Drew, baby. Hotel Drew.
Hotel Drew is here.
I'm on the road, baby.
All right. My mid-play of the week is none other wide receiver Jacobi Meyers, Las Vegas Raiders. Ultimate floor play. Some would say the condom of wide receivers based on how safe of a play he has been outside of maybe week 4. Finishes wide receiver 3 week 1, wide receiver 10, wide receiver 12, and wide receiver 15 over the last 3. In those last 3 weeks, he has been the dominant wide receiver 1 for the Raiders. 30 targets, 19 receptions, 3 touchdowns, 186 yards through that time. He's been the first read 35.1% of the time through that span, compared to Devontae Adams's 26%. Through those 3 weeks, and yes, I like to break fantasy football down to 3-week portions because I'm a follower of trends, and fantasy football, to me at least, is a lot about following those trends. Through those 3 weeks, he's averaging 15.4 fantasy points per game, 4 of 6 games on the year with double-digit targets. Just like I said, works 99% of the time. Jacobi Meyers this week, Detroit Lions allowed the 11th most points to the position on average. Meyers wins at all levels of the field, highlighted by his positional splits, playing out wide, playing in the slot. We will see a mixed amount of Cam Sutton and Jerry Jacobs on the other side of the field. Two decent matchups. You don't really want to see Jacobi Meyers match up too much with the rookie Brian Branch in the slot. He's been pretty good against the wideouts on the season. The last 3 games, the Lions have allowed 268 passing yards average against. That's 4th most. Pass-heavy, favorable game script. The return of Jimmy Garoppolo, who Jacobi Meyers had very productive with in the backfield. He's only faced the Lions once in his career, and he put up over 100 yards. That was last year. We have come a long way from the Jacobi Meyers touchdown countdown projection. 5 receptions, 80 yards, and a touchdown. Fire up Jacobi Meyers in week 8, and you won't be disappointed. You won't need the plan B if you fire up Jacobi Myers in week 8.
I'd like to raise my hand.
Plan A this week.
The fact that you could just keep a straight face throughout that entire rant is a pure testament to your professionalism. To how, oh my God, like, we're done here. Cut it. We're finished.
This is our peak.
All right, so let's. We're headed off the rails on this show. I love it. So that's Bussin, Disgussin, and Mid. Wait till we get into our next segment. Bussin players, Drew went with Calvin Ridley. Rhett went with Rashee Rice, and I went with Drake London. Disgussin players, Drew went with Courtland Sutton. Rhett went with Dalton Kincaid. And I went with Aaron Jones. And our mid plays of the week, Gus Edwards, Drew's pick. Rhett went with Daryl Henderson, and I went with Jacobi Meyers. That's Bussin, Disgussin, and Mid heading into week 8. Thank you, everybody tuning in who has either dropped in or still with us. Drop the comment. We appreciate each and every one of you. While you're here, please like the stream, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell to get notified whenever the Fantasy in Frames team drops new fire content. Let's head into our new segment. One that we are pretty happy with what we're going to do. Oh, sorry. One that we're pretty happy with. I just don't want to say the name. Let's jump into it. Master. I love it. So what we're going to do here, we're going to rotate host. We're going to give the other 2 guys a situation, a fantasy situation, whether it's we're going to pit 2 players against each other. Who knows what it's going to grow into, whether it's a strategy thing. One guy likes 0 RB, one guy doesn't like 0 RB, so on and so forth. Then we're going to give the other 2 guys a limited amount of time to argue their case on the player or the situation. And then the judge, the player, the guy who is presenting the situation along with the viewers can vote on who they think is the better option heading into the week. Round 1, I will be the judge of this one, pitting Drew against Rhett. And the situation is rest of season, Breece Hall versus Alvin Kamara. Drew is going to represent Breece Hall, and Rhett is going to represent Alvin Kamara. Drew, we went alphabetical order, brother. Sorry. D comes before R. But you got the floor, man.
I'm bringing the D. Let's go. All right. My lead argument for this debate is the fact that Breece Hall is just simply the better running back. You trust the talent, baby. It's that simple. But since that is such a simple statement, I'm going to give you a little bit more. Prior to week 5, the matchup against the Denver Broncos, for the first time since he came back from injury, Robert Saleh told us that there would no longer be limited snaps for Breece Hall. Since then, he's gone on to be the running back 3 and the running back 5 the last 2 weeks. And that running back 5 finish was also against a really tough Philadelphia Eagles run defense as well. Just, for the record, it wasn't nothing but cupcake matchups, all right? He had to get it done against tough defenses too. So now for Alvin Kamara, the guy I'm arguing against, what happens whenever Derek Carr's shoulder finally starts to clear up and he has other options like, throwing it deep to Chris Olave, hey, I play for the Saints. If you didn't know, America, the cop, everybody should know he plays for the Saints now. Derek Carr's shoulder is the only one that really ain't heard that Chris Olave still exists. But once that shoulder clears up, All of a sudden, Derek Carr's going to remember, oh, I can throw the ball deep to Chris Olave. I don't got to dump the ball down to Alvin Kamara 10 times a game. Kamara is averaging less than 4 yards a carry, and he only has 1 touchdown on the ground so far through 4 games. Now, I don't know about you, but I find it hard to believe that he's going to average 10 receptions per game the rest of the year, which is what he's doing through 4 games. It's like 9.75 receptions per game so far through 4 games. The man is living off of dump downs from a handicapped Derek Carr. Now, whenever you look at the rest of the season schedule for Breece Hall, he has the 13th easiest schedule for fantasy running backs based on fantasy points above expectation, and that includes plus matchups against Houston and Miami in week 14 and 15, just in time for the fantasy playoffs. Now, whenever we look at the comparison for Alvin Kamara, he has the 15th toughest schedule for fantasy running backs the rest of the way, and this includes playoff matchups in week 16 and week 17 against the Rams and the Bucs, who have given up the 8th least and the 4th least fantasy points above expectation to the running back position this year. So if you want the better player, if you want the guy with the more favorable schedule moving forward, it's Breece Hall, baby.
All right. There you heard it. Breece Hall argument. Very well done, Drew. I like it. Kind of sewered Alvin Kamara a little bit with some of those stats. Rhett, let's hear it, man. Tell me why Alvin Kamara over Breece Hall the rest of the season.
All right, first off, we could go ahead and say it, and I'm going to say it as eloquently as I can. Talent schmalent, Drew. All right? Listen to me. Alvin Kamara is the easiest call ever for the rest of the season, and it's for the exact same reason you just said. Since he's returned, he hasn't had anything less than 24 touches on a weekly basis. And I don't know if you've been watching the Saints the way that I watch the Saints, but I will tell you this. Even when Derek Carr's little shoulder was healthy, that offense was still dunking it down. It was still garbage. It was still looking terrible this entire time. So what I'm telling you is this. Elite usage plus bad offense equals money in all formats. And you mentioned the schedule. Kamara's ain't bad, dog. Indianapolis, Chicago, Atlanta, Carolina, New York, Los Angeles, all left on the slate.
Why'd you stop there? Why don't you talk about the fantasy playoffs? Keep going.
You tell me about it later. We're not getting into that right now. I'm just here so I don't get fined. But look, is there any game in that list that doesn't scream RB1 for you? Yes or no?
No.
Okay, he's an RB1 at least 10 weeks of the season. Over half of the season, I know you have to win it in the playoffs, but you got to get to the playoffs too. So you can point to the big plays of Breece Hall. We can't predict big plays. We can't predict volume. So it makes the call easy for me. Alvin Kamara over Breece Hall. I'm taking it to the grave.
Oh, 2 very good arguments. Breece Hall, Alvin Kamara. If you're in the chat, let us know who you think is going to be the more valuable running back for fantasy purposes rest of the season. If you're listening to this on podcast and you can't tune in to the live show, let us know on Twitter at @RManuel Sports, at Drew3MR, at Fantasy and Frames, the better running back to own rest of the season. Jorge Edwards, Brenda Letitia. I can't read this. I can't read this right now. It's so small. Can you guys see it?
Those are song lyrics. I can't remember where it's from, but they're song lyrics, man. I can hear it in my head. I just can't put it out there.
All right. So for me, I'm gonna go. Oh yeah, it is DMX. Yeah,
DMX. Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Jorge. That was gonna bug the shit out of me.
Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna go red on this one. I think the volume of Alvin Kamara with like Rougeroux said, with the game scripts and everything is gonna benefit Alvin Kamara more than it's
like the Saints fan in the comments said, and like the Saints fan judging the show said, I'm gonna go with the Saints player. How predictable is this shit? I'm getting cooked.
Ducks fly together, Drew. I'm just watching over my boy Rett.
That's all Saints fans got this year is the Alvin Kamara debate. So I'll let y'all live.
All right, let's get into the next one. Judge Rhett. Let's hear it, man.
All right, guys. So what we have right now is we have a case of a guy who came into the season was considered as an MVP candidate, and one guy who was considered a little bit of an injury liability heading into the season. But now we gonna fire it up, and we're gonna talk about for the rest of the season. Do we want Tua Tagovailoa or Joe Burrow? And so once again, we're gonna go in alphabetical order. And Chris, C comes before the D in this occasion. So go ahead and give us your best argument for Joe Burrow.
I always come last.
My God.
All right. This is going to be short because trying to find reasons why Joe Burrow is a better fantasy asset than Tua Tagovailoa right now has been pretty tough. So it's a tough one. Tua has all the pieces to outplay Joe Burrow the rest of the way. But is Tua a hungry dog? Because hungry dogs are always looking to eat. And I think Tua on the Miami Dolphins offense is starting to get a wee bit chubby. And if the Bengals want to turn the ship around, they're going to need Joe Burrow to want to go out looking to eat. Pretty much for me, it's rest of season strength of schedule. Joe Burrow has the more lucrative matchups, playoff schedule. And I'm going to mention playoff schedule here, Drew. Tua has the Jets, who he faces twice in the back end of his schedule, the Cowboys and the Ravens. And if you look at what Joe Burrow's got in the fantasy playoffs, he's got the Vikings, the Steelers, and the Chiefs. 3 much more lucrative matchups. Burrow's been down bad. The whole offense as a whole has been down bad. The rate of play has been in more of Joe Burrow's favor, 38.6 compared to Tua's 32. So what that's telling me right there is pretty much Joe Burrow has more opportunity to score fantasy points. He only has the one top 10 finish on the year, but it really is going to come down to Joe Burrow being a better asset based on the team situation in terms of making the playoffs and Joe Burrow's health. They can pretty much be the same guy rest of the way. But for me, it's Burrow's matchups that leads up to more possibilities of high output weeks. And if you have Tua, maybe you can flip Tua for Joe Burrow and maybe a little extra piece plus to make your team better as a whole.
Like
if you go after the Joe Burrow owner who's down bad right now. So for me, it's Joe Burrow rest of the season.
Yeah, all that other stuff was kind of trash, but the last part, I like that though, where you talked about trading Tua plus for Burrow. I like that. That's a good idea. Or you know, getting Burrow for Tua plus. So I can't do the just take the better player argument for this one like I did for Breece Hall because I do believe that Burrow is a better player compared to Tua, and that didn't really work for me last time anyway because I'm getting colluded against by the Saints fans. So I'm going to go a different route this time. I'm going to tell you that you should take the quarterback that isn't the better player, but he's been the better fantasy option so far this year. Now, I feel like I need to remind you that the assortment of weapons he has surrounded by, including Tyreek Hill, who just might hit 2,000 yards this year, Jalen Waddle, who, Rhett, if we got time, he's going to tell you why you shouldn't panic on this guy. And then the assortment of running backs they have where any of them could take a screen pass to the house at any point. That's the beautiful thing about Tua. He can give you a huge fantasy day without even really having to do much other than let his playmakers have the huge fantasy day for him. And at the end of the day, all fantasy points, they count the same. He's leading the NFL in passing yards. He's tied for second in passing touchdowns. He's first in yards per attempt. And he continues to be an extremely accurate quarterback, coming in at 5th in adjusted completion percentage. Now, all of this has led to Tua being the quarterback 6 in points per game. So, I know Burrow, he's been injured a little bit. Points per game, Tua's been 6. And you're holding your nose. I can only assume that that's for the quarterback 27 ranking in points per game that Joe Burrow holds right now, just slightly below. And I said below, not above. Slightly below Derek Carr and Kenny Pickett. That's right. You would have been better off starting Kenny Pickett so far than you would have Joe Burrow. You didn't hear it from me. You did,
man. Stop beating the horse, man. All right, I'm down. Y'all want to see a dead body? I'm dead, man.
Now, according to fantasy points above expectation, you're right. Tua, he has the toughest schedule for fantasy quarterbacks the rest of the way. But Joe Burrow's isn't much better. He's coming in at the 3rd toughest schedule. So if you're going to have a tough schedule one way or the other, you might as well go ahead and just give me the quarterback that's already been better to start the year. So give me Tua over Joe Burrow for fantasy, not for real life.
Look, I mean, we have to make a decision, and it's an easy decision. I mean, Chris,
thank you.
You tried hard. You tried hard. You swung the bat. You did your best today. That being said, I mean, you just got bodied. Give the round to Drew, baby. Give it to him.
Thank you. I take back all of my stuff about collusion and everything.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
I think I even got to go with Drew on that one too. I think you got to change my mind there a little bit. Yeah, so that's Joe Burrow versus Tua Tagovailoa. We got one more before we get into our last segment, and then into Shoot the Gap. This time, Judge Drew. What's the situation, buddy?
All right, so we got a rest of season wide receiver debate to go on. We got Adam Thielen versus Brandon Ayuk. I'm going to be the judge. Rhett's going to tell you why you should take Adam Thielen. Chris is going to tell you why you should take Brandon Ayuk. If we're going to keep going alphabetical order, Chris, let us know why Brandon Ayuk is the guy.
Hey, if you're not first, you're last, right? Ricky Bobby.
That's right.
Adam Thielen has been the better fantasy asset for the first few weeks. I'll give him that. Ayuk will be the better player to own down the stretch. The upside is there. The opportunity for fantasy points is there. He just hasn't taken advantage of that opportunity as of yet. Ayuk has a higher depth of target, 14.4 yards compared to Thielen's 7.7 yards. And what's that telling me is Ayuk is being targeted further down the field, which gives him more potential for big plays and touchdowns. Ayuk has a higher air yard share, 46.9% compared to Adam Thielen's 30.8%. Ayuk is receiving a larger portion of his team's passing yards in the air, which indicates his importance in the offense and his opportunity for fantasy points. Ayuk has a higher yards per route run, 3.62 compared to Adam Thielen's 2.22. And what this is telling me, again, more opportunity for fantasy points. He's being more efficient and productive when he's running his routes, which will ultimately translate to more fantasy points per snap. Ayuk has a higher yards per target. Yipped. See, it just doesn't work. It's just not as cool as more of 11.88 compared to Adam Thielen's 8.63, which is telling me again that Brandon Ayuk is making more of his opportunities. So ultimately, rest of season, yes, Adam Thielen for the beginning has been the better fantasy asset, like I said, but rest of season with the schedule that he's got, with the team that he's on, Deebo Samuel's hurt. He is the de facto wide receiver one for the San Francisco 49ers. And with these efficiency numbers and opportunity that he will soon take advantage of, Brandon Ayuk is the better player than Adam Thielen rest of season.
Okay, that's great. I love it for you. I love your enthusiasm. I love everything. But I'm going to tell you this. Chris, did you guys have a show up in Canada called Family Matters?
We did. Okay,
have a
show up in Canada.
You're familiar with the legend. You're familiar with the legend Stephon Urkel, correct? You know, Steve's
I was more of a fan of Stephon
Diggs, whatever. It doesn't matter.
His alter ego.
So, yeah, Stephon Urkel. We're going to pump up the volume with Adam Thielen, just like Stephon Urkel did once he got out of there. So, look.
You got it.
Did I do that? Yes, I did. And we're taking Adam Thielen over Brandon Ayuk the rest of the season. And here's why. He's got great matchups coming up. He's got a great shot at being a wide receiver one next 4 of the 5 weeks. He's had 12 targets in the past 5 games. The trust is there with Bryce Young. That guy plays designed to go for him, despite the A-dot things you're talking about. That should continue. Their run game has not been great this year, which only tells me in order to get yards, they're going to need to chuck the rock. Bryce is going to get better as the year goes on. Yes, there's going to be some tough matchups in the playoffs, weeks 15 through 17. But the volume that he's going to get should offset that. I'll keep it short and sweet. Give me Adam Thielen for the rest of the year. Drew, make your call, baby. We got to roll.
I can appreciate the diss track you just put together for Canadians at the beginning. But look, judges, they do their homework too. The Carolina Panthers rest of the season, they have the 9th toughest schedule for fantasy wide receivers. San Francisco 49ers have the easiest schedule for wide receivers. So with the debate you brought to the table, both Chris and Rhett, considering that as well, I got to side with Chris on this one and go with Brandon Ayuk.
Everybody wins.
everybody wins.
We're all one and one,
Way to
baby.
go, boys. Just like we planned it.
The
That
NFL is scripted, and so is our show.
there you go. That has it. That is master debation here on Fourth and Frames. Working title, maybe. Well, maybe it's growing on us.
Hey.
We had Brees Hall versus Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara was the winner there. Joe Burrow versus Tua Tagovailoa. Tua was the winner there, and Adam Thielen versus Brandon Ayuk. Ayuk was the winner there. Again, follow us at Drew3MR, at Manual Sports, at FFChrisB, and at Fantasy and Frames on Twitter, and let us know who you think is the better player rest of season. Guys, final segment before we head out of here and head into Shoot the Gap IDP show. Ring the alarm. Let's go. We just keep rolling. I love these new videos. I love it. So Ring the Alarm is a segment where we will present a player who had a bad week or weeks, and Drew and Rhett will be on the side of either ringing the alarm, pushing the panic button on this player, or canceling the alert for at least this week or maybe beyond. And the very first one is going to go to you, Drew. It is a wide receiver. Season output so far, 32 receptions, 383 yards, and 2 lowly touchdowns. Wide receiver 42 in points per game with 9.5, and wide receiver 33 in total fantasy points with 66.3. Jorge Edwards, thank you for the $10 super chat. Best segment intro ever. It is growing on me. But Drew, are we canceling the alert or are we ringing the alarm on Devonta Smith?
I'm going to cancel alert on this one. I'm going to take it another step further and say that I think he's probably one of my favorite buy low options in all of fantasy football right now. He hasn't had a wide receiver 1 finish since week 2, and he's finished outside of the top 40 wide receivers in 4 out of 7 weeks, despite being on the field for damn near every snap of every game. So I get why people would be panicking, but he's simply too talented of a receiver to see the usage he's seeing and not see his production eventually spike. He still leads the team in routes run per dropback, and he has 100-plus air yards in 4 out of 7 games. The big problem with Devonta Smith is he hasn't been the 1B to A.J. Brown's 1A like a lot of people expected this offseason. He's been the clear wide receiver 2. There is no 1A, 1B. A.J. Brown's the wide receiver 1. Devonta Smith is a wide receiver 2. He's still second on the team in first read targets, but it's a very clear second with A.J. Brown, who is doubling him in that aspect. Now, that being said, better days are coming for Devonta Smith. The Eagles have had the 10th toughest schedule for fantasy wide receivers so far this season, but they have the 9th easiest schedule for fantasy wide receivers the rest of the way. And this includes 2 super juicy matchups against the Seahawks and Cardinals secondary during the fantasy playoffs. So if the Devonta Smith manager in your league is struggling, I would highly advise you to go buy low right now while you still can.
And what would a buy low package look like for a player like Devonta Smith?
I would try to grab, one of your, like a flex play wide receiver and somebody on your bench. I'm always, if I'm buying low on somebody, I'm trying to do a 2-for-1 where I'm giving up the 2 and trading for the 1. So with Devonta struggling the way he has, give up somebody that's give up somebody that has produced similar from a wide receiver output standpoint. Throw in a bench stash on top of that. Try to do a 2-for-1 and go get Devonta. So it's tough league to league. It's very different, but I think it's something that could easily get done, especially if the Devonta manager has been struggling and has a losing record so far through 7 weeks.
Awesome. Great insight there from Drew, canceling the alert on wide receiver Devonta Smith. Next one, Rhett, another wide receiver, season output almost the same, 30 receptions, 359 yards, and another 2 touchdowns. Wide receiver 29 on the season in fantasy points per game with 10.5, wide receiver 36 in total fantasy points, pretty much the same player as Devonta Smith. This one, another high-profile wide receiver, Miami Dolphins, Jalen Waddle. Are we canceling the alert or are we ringing that alarm?
Man, you are canceling that alert, and I'm going to tell you exactly why. We all know the Miami Dolphins are better with Jalen Waddle in the lineup, And with Jalen Waddle being as talented as he is, better days are coming. The games are going to come. He hasn't had a wide receiver one week yet, but he's been pretty steady, like you mentioned, with the 10.5 points per game, which means he's been a flex option pretty much every week this year. He's had 5 targets at least in every game this year. You can't cancel a guy that you're going to start, in my opinion. So I get it. There's been high expectations. But for my second Family Matters reference of the night, I'll say this. Steve Urkel married Laura shooting his shot for years. All you have to do is shoot your shot for a few weeks with Jalen Waddle to get the results you want. So with that being said, we need to stay the course. He only has one really bad matchup the rest of the year. A wide receiver 2 finish is still very much in the cards for Jalen Waddle. Cancel the alert. That week is coming, and it's coming soon. Tyreek cannot do 2,000 this season. Maybe he can because he's a beast, but Waddle's too talented. Cancel the alert.
Yeah. Some pretty high-profile players in this week's Ring the Alarm with Jalen Waddle and Devonta Smith, 2 guys highly drafted, not performing to their ADP. But let's get into the last one before we head into Shoot the Gap IDP show with Nate Markham, Jorge Edwards, and Hollywood Titan there waiting for us to wrap this up. But Drew, running back, season output, 44 carries, 189 yards. I think I wrote that right. 1 touchdown. That's rushing, receiving nine receptions, 83 yards, 0 touchdowns, RB 18 in points per game, 12.6, which is not too bad considering fantasy production, but considering who this running back is, it's pretty bad. RB 42 in total fantasy points, 37.1. He has missed 3 games, so reliability is going to be an issue. RB 26 and RB 39 since his return. Are we ringing the alarm or are we canceling the alert on running back Los Angeles Chargers Austin Eckler?
Yeah, I'm canceling the alert on this one too. So similar to Devonta Smith, Austin Eckler, he's just simply too good at the game for the trends that we've seen the last couple weeks to continue. One of the reasons that I was lower than consensus on Eckler during draft season was due to my belief that he wouldn't be able to sustain the insane touchdown percentage numbers that he's had over the last couple of years. But now it's flipped on its head in the other direction. In the 2 games since he returned from injury, he's had 36 total opportunities, including rushing attempts and targets. And he hasn't gotten into the end zone once. And that makes no sense for someone that's been as good as Eckler has been, and that I would expect. I expect it to change in the very near future. Now, why is that going to change in the very near future? Because the Chargers have the easiest schedule for fantasy running backs for the rest of the season by a mile. They only have 1 matchup the rest of the year against a defense that's in the top 10 in fantasy points above expectation to the running back position. And that's a week 10 matchup against the Detroit Lions that they just let Gus Edwards have a top 10 finish at the position. So not to mention that his fantasy playoffs matchup include the 3rd easiest, the 11th easiest, and he caps it off in fantasy championship week against the Denver Broncos that are the easiest matchup for fantasy running backs. They're historically bad against all positions at this point, but especially against running backs this year. So I said earlier that Devonta Smith was one of my favorite buys in fantasy football right now, and Austin Eckler, he's right there with him. So go buy Austin Eckler, go buy Devonta Smith and profit. Go get these guys before they get right.
There it is. Canceling the alert across the board this week on Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle, and Austin Eckler. Fellas, that's it for us. Another great show in the books. Week 8 is here. We will see you week 9. For Drew at Drew3MR, for Rhett at R Manual Sports, I'm Chris Battistel. Make sure you follow at Fantasy and Frames on the X, Twitter, Facebook, all the social media platforms, Instagram. That's it for us. Make sure you stick around for Shoot the Gap. Toodles.
Toodles.